Woo! Okay. We're going to head over to PMQs now. Hello to everyone. If you'd like to join our friends in the chat here, all you need to do is hit that subscribe button. So we just head over to the House of Commons. The Speaker is making a statement at the moment about Ukraine.
Delivered a speech at the Butcher Summit, which was opened by the President of Ukraine, and took with me specific cross-party messages of solidarity from the House of Commons, the Prime Minister, the Leader of the Opposition and the Leader of the Liberal Democrats. The appreciation felt by the people of Ukraine at the support offered by this House, the people of the United Kingdom, should not be underestimated. Indeed, his nightly address on Monday, President Zelensky explicitly expressed his thanks to the United Kingdom for the support provided to them. Order, order. We now come to Prime Minister's questions. John Grady.
Question number 1, please, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, just picking up on your comments, can I say that on Monday night I spoke to President Zelensky and he wanted me to pass on to you his thanks for attending in Ukraine, particularly on the 3rd anniversary of the massacre at Bucha, which I've been to Bucha. It's a terrible 3rd anniversary, so I pass on those thanks. Mr. Speaker, we've been preparing for all eventualities ahead of the confirmation of US tariffs later today. Let me be clear with the House. A trade war is in nobody's interests, and the country deserves, and we will take, a calm, pragmatic approach. That's why constructive talks are progressing to agree a wider economic prosperity deal with the US. That's why we're working with all industries and sectors likely to be impacted. Our decisions will always be guided by our national interest, and that's why we have prepared for all eventualities, and we will rule nothing out. Mr. Speaker, our deepest sympathies are with the people of Myanmar and Thailand. We are sending immediate life-saving support to assist their efforts. May I also extend my personal condolences to the family, friends and colleagues of Christina McKelvey. She was much loved and will be sorely missed, especially by our colleagues in the SNP here and in Scotland. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
John Grady.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week, the full state pension will rise by £472 a year, putting money in the pockets of pensioners in Glasgow and across the United Kingdom. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that this rise is only possible because of Labour's plan for change and our commitment to the triple lock?
Well, he's absolutely right. We can commit to the triple lock because we've restored stability after they crashed the economy. And that means, Mr. Speaker, next week 12 million pensioners will receive up to £470 more. That's an extra £1,900 over this Parliament, including 1 million pensioners in Scotland. And the contrast couldn't be clearer. The Shadow Chancellor called the triple lock unsustainable, and the Leader of the Opposition wants to means test the state pension so that she can cut it.
Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Badenoch.
Coming out all guns blazing, isn't he?
Mr. Speaker, the triple lock was a Conservative policy. Rather than...
The childishness is already grating on me.
Order. I know. You was inadvertently said. Carry on, Leader.
Rather than the Prime Minister congratulating himself for what we did, why don't we talk about what he's doing? From Sunday, Labour's jobs tax will mean many British businesses face a terrible choice: to cut wages, put up prices or sack their staff. What is the Prime Minister's advice to those businesses?
Well, Mr. Speaker, she says the triple lock was Conservative policy. It was once thought to be the party of sound finances, but they blew all of that. Mr. Speaker, she asked what we're doing. We're clearing up the mess that they left.
Well, mention the 22 billion.
Instability, and we recognise the pressures that are bearing down on businesses and individuals and working people. That's why we're rolling up our sleeves. And yesterday, Mr. Speaker, I was pleased to announce the national living wage increasing by £1,400. That's a pay rise for millions of workers. We've announced £150 for the Warm Homes discount, extended now to 6 million households. That's 1 in 5 families. And wages are going up faster than prices. And never forget, the party opposite, worst living standards on record, inflation up to 11%, public services left on their knees.
Kemi Badenoch.
Mr. Speaker, the only mess is the one that he made with his budget. They had an emergency budget last week that fixed nothing. He says he's bringing stability. All we see is fragility. During the election, the Prime Minister also promised that he would not increase taxes on working people. But even the OBR says that the jobs tax will be passed on to workers. On average, families will be £3,500 poorer. Why should anyone trust him again?
Prime Minister.
Well, her fantasy figure is about as much use as Liz Truss's economic planning.
Economic
and she turns
fanny.
up every week to carve
Economic
the
fanny.
sidelines.
Did you just say economic fanny?
Decisions we made at the budget. Yesterday, Mr. Speaker, she held a press conference, and she couldn't say whether she would reverse the decisions that we made at the budget. Now, I understand, because she can't bring herself to say that she doesn't want the investment of an extra £26 billion in our NHS. I'm not surprised at that. That's 2 million extra appointments, that's 1,000 more GPs, a pay rise for nurses, etc., etc. But let me get her position right if I can follow it. She wants the extra £26 billion in the NHS. Mr. Speaker, that was paid for.
No, I
by the
like to
National
think that he
Insurance
said
Fund.
Liz
She
Truss's
wants that.
economic fanny.
She doesn't want to reverse the national insurance rises. So she's now reduced this absurd position of voting against the budget, carping against a budget that she actually agrees with.
Kemi Badenoch.
Mr. Speaker, I don't agree with making people poorer. I don't agree with pensioner poverty.
Yes, you do.
I don't agree.
Love making people poorer. And you Tory scum are all for that.
Out there, they are calling it awful April. That's because of decisions he has made, because he made promises and broke them. His promises are worthless, Mr. Speaker. People are getting poorer. Before the election, he pledged to freeze council tax. Instead, it's going up everywhere. Even in Birmingham, where there's 17,000 tonnes of rubbish uncollected on the streets. Does the Prime Minister regret promising the British people he would freeze their council tax when he has so obviously failed?
Prime Minister.
Well, I have to ask, if she doesn't want people to be poorer, why didn't she resign when she was in government? Mr. Speaker, the last government put up council tax for 12 years in a row. She, I think, was actually Minister for Council Tax. And in the year she's been, what she do? She put it up. And even now, the Conservatives' own Local Government Association manifesto, so currently their position, page 9, we asked the government to remove the caps on council tax. So who's leading the charge? Hampshire County Council, they wanted a 15% hike, we said no. Slough Council wanted a hike, we said no. Windsor and Maidenhead was Tory, now Lib Dem. They wanted a hike and we said no. And it's no surprise that council tax is £300 cheaper under Labour councils than under Tory councils.
Kemi Badenoch.
Mr. Speaker, he doesn't want to talk about Birmingham, and that's because he knows the situation. So I'll say it again. 17,000 tonnes of rubbish on Birmingham streets. Normally, a state of emergency is called for natural disasters, not Labour ones. His policies have left our economy dangerously fragile. The Chancellor, once again, left herself no room for manoeuvre. Economic experts, real economists, say she will either have to break her fiscal rules or put up taxes. Which will it be?
Prime Minister.
I think she must have picked up the script she was using a few weeks ago. Because it was only then she was saying, in the spring statement, you're going to put up taxes. But look, Mr. Speaker, in relation to the situation in Birmingham, it is completely unacceptable. I fully support the Council in declaring it a major incident to resolve the situation, and we'll put in whatever additional support is needed. But when the party opposite was in government, we lost more days to strike action than in any year since the 1980s. NHS workers were on the picket line, not on the front line, and that sent waiting lists through the roof. So we'll take no lectures on industrial harmony from them.
He said it. He said it. Not taking
Mr. Speaker,
lectures.
the whole House would have heard that he didn't say whether or not he could keep his fiscal rules. That means that it's either that or putting up taxes. 9 months ago, we left Labour the fastest growing economy in the G7. We did. We did. And I remember watching his MPs laughing at their first destructive budget. They've had another one that has made our economy dangerously vulnerable. The Bank of England says his policies have pushed up the cost of living for families. Does he disagree with the bank, or does he accept his policies mean higher bills?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, she must be the only person left in the country who actually thinks they did well on the economy when they were in power. That was what was tested at the last election. Living standards, the worst on record. Inflation, 11% it soared up to. The NHS on its knees. Oh, Mr. Speaker, she's so obsessed with talking down the country that she's not read the OBR forecast properly. Growth up in 2026, 2077 up, 2028 up, 2029 up. And thanks to our planning reforms, the largest growth measure the OBR have ever costed. And what did the Tories do when the bill came before Parliament? They abstained. Well, you don't grow the economy or build houses by yourself. They're the same old party. They haven't changed. Nothing's new.
Mr. Speaker, he talks about inflation. We left it at 2%. It is now twice what the OBR forecast when we were in government. The fact is, his decisions have made our economy fragile, just as we face global trade wars. In November, I urged him to seize the draft US trade deal Conservatives negotiated. Instead, Mr. Speaker, he lost our most experienced trade negotiator. It's no wonder he can't get a tariff deal for British cars. On this side of the House, we secured investments for that industry, £600 million from BMW, £2 billion from Nissan, £4 billion from Jaguar Land Rover. Labour's record is a car industry in crisis, even before tariffs. There are 25,000 more jobs now at risk. He says he's preparing for eventualities. Can the Prime Minister tell us exactly what he is doing to protect the British car industry from his failure to negotiate?
We're taking a calm, pragmatic approach and keeping our feet on the ground. We are
go back to playing Candy Crush
on a wider economic prosperity deal with the US. That is really important at this moment. We are working with all sectors that are likely to be impacted, and we're guided by our national interest at all times. And that's why we've said we won't rule anything out. But it is important at a moment like this that we don't have knee-jerk reactions, that we are actually cool-headed about this, and that's why we won't rule anything out. But she must be. She's the EU. Trade Secretary. She was the Trade Secretary, Mr. Speaker, who failed to get a trade deal with the US.
Mr. Speaker, today the Trump administration will announce new tariffs that will hurt working people in the US and around the world. Would the Prime Minister agree with me that at a time when big tech has grown fat by corrupting our politics and preying on young people, that the wrong approach would be to pander to his bullying tactics and to tech millionaires in his imperial court by cutting the digital services tax? Can he assure the public that the poorest won't get cuts while the richest get a free ride?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank her for raising this. It is an important issue, and there are issues in relation to Northern Ireland in particular that we have to deal with very carefully. We will, Mr. Speaker, always put the national interest first, and that's why I'm pleased that talks are ongoing and they're constructive talks. I do believe that a trade war is in nobody's interest, and all of the sectors and industries impacted are of the same view. So we'll continue to make that progress in the national interest.
The Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I associate myself with the earlier remarks of the Prime Minister, particularly about Myanmar and Thailand? And
Sorry, everyone. I know my feed's frozen. I'll just get that sorted and go back to the beginning of what our friend Ed Davey was saying. Come on. Okay. Ooh, Houston, we have a problem. And the problem is Houston. Right, just give me a sec. I think got a couple of problems here. Let's have a look. House of Commons. Oh God, no. I don't know if this is just my setup here. Oh, it's gone to a different stream.
To make what I think is a false.
What I'm going to do is I'm just going to get it back into the position where Ed Davey started asking the questions. Just 1 second. Sorry about this. Okay. Okay, so I'm just gonna start it again. Really sorry. It's gonna go from Ed Davey's question here. Okay.
thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I associate myself with
Did you pay your
earlier
TV
remarks of
license?
the Prime Minister, particularly about Myanmar and Thailand? And can I support the aid that is going and hope that despite the budget cuts we can be as generous as possible because of the humanitarian crisis there? Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has shown commendable leadership over Ukraine with his plan for a military coalition of the willing against Putin. Will he now provide similar leadership with an economic coalition of the willing against Trump's tariffs for free trade so we can avoid a global trade war and a global recession?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think every week he tries to tempt me to make what I think is a false choice between our relationship with the US and our relationship with other countries, particularly Europe. I think that's the wrong choice on defence, on security and intelligence for reasons that we've rehearsed across this chamber. I also think it's wrong on trade and the economy. We have a good deal of trade, a balanced trade relationship with the US, and I believe that our interests are best served by calmly trying to secure a deal which is in our national interest, whilst at the same time preparing and leaving all options on the table.
Sir Ed Davey.
Minister's reply. I hope he is able to cut a deal, but I increasingly fear that the deal won't be good enough to avoid a global trade war. That's why I think one of the options must be to work with our European allies, our Commonwealth allies and others, because if we don't tackle Trump's tariffs, we could be saying goodbye to free trade for a generation. Mr. Speaker, if I may turn to a domestic matter now. 3 years ago, the American private equity firm KKR bought a 25% stake in Northumbrian Water. Since then, people across the North East have seen their water bills soar, whilst in last year alone, Northumbrian Water has dumped nearly 1 million tonnes of raw sewage into Durham's Whitburn Coast Conservation Area. KKR are now poised to buy into Thames Water because ministers have ruled out a special administration regime. Can the Prime Minister guarantee that Thames Water will not be allowed to repeat the same trick of putting up bills and dumping raw sewage at the same time? They allowed it, he shouldn't.
Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, in relation to his comments at the beginning of the question,
he should be the leader of the opposition, shouldn't he?
It's not sensible to say the first response should be to jump in to a trade war with the US. That cannot be the first response of the United Kingdom, and I will resist his urgings to do that. In relation to water, he's absolutely right to point out the appalling record on water of the party opposite, just like the record on everything was appalling, and that's why I'm really pleased that we've passed the Water Act already to take the necessary measures, but we will go further.
David Egan.
Yesterday, the Work and Pension Select Committee visited Manchester, where we saw the power of devolution in action, in this case helping people find work. So with just 5 percentage points separating Labour and Conservative last time, does the Prime Minister agree that to get the maximum advantage from Labour's devolution offer, the West of England needs an ambitious Labour mayor in Helen Godwin for more jobs, to fix our buses and to get the homes we need built?
I believe it's best for communities when their leaders have skin in the game. Helen Godwin grew up in Stapleton, went to college in Filton, and has a great record fighting for the community where she's raising her family. Mr. Speaker, our plan for change has delivered record funding for the West of England. That's more money for better buses, for potholes, and getting young people into work. That's the difference a Labour mayor working with a Labour government delivers for the West of England.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will know that many in the House will be assuaged by his suggestion that he will act in the national interest in relation to tariffs. But most won't have considered that in acting in the national interest, what occurs in Northern Ireland is no longer solely in his control. He knows that exports from Northern Ireland are UK exports, rightly so. Yet imports to Northern Ireland could lay at the consequence of EU retaliatory action. In keeping all of his options open, now we have to live in a world with the consequences of the last government with his support. Will he indicate that he is prepared to take steps to either exempt Northern Ireland from EU action or take retaliatory action if they do not?
Fuck off.
Can I thank him for raising
Stand
this
up and
issue,
say
which is
no.
of real importance
Sit down
to
again.
his constituents and
Say
everybody
no.
in Northern Ireland. It is a very serious issue. That's why we need to be calm and
care about Northern
pragmatic.
Ireland.
And I think that's what workers and businesses in Northern Ireland would want to see from this government at a time like this. We are, as you would expect, looking carefully at the details of any retaliatory tariffs announced by the EU, if they are, and what impact they might have on businesses. As he knows, where goods do not enter the EU, then businesses can claim a full reimbursement of any EU duties paid. But I reassure in the interest of Northern Ireland at the forefront of our decisions, and he may want to know that this morning the Business Secretary spoke to the Northern Ireland Executive because this is a serious issue. We need to work together to resolve it in the interests of everybody in Northern Ireland.
DUP traitors. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr.
Yeah,
Speaker.
never
While the last
privatised
government
national-
resorted to
natural
damaging
monopolies.
keyboard diplomacy, this government is leading, bringing 40 nations together this week to tackle illegal immigration. Like the Prime Minister, I've seen firsthand how
Opening safe
counter-terror
routes.
powers can disrupt threats
By
before
opening safe
lives
routes.
are lost. That same approach is essential in dismantling the smuggling networks, Mr. Speaker. Does he agree?
Just make
it's
safe
time
routes.
the Conservatives and Reform drop the posturing, put national security first, and
get
back
safe
our
routes.
borders bill.
Safe routes.
Well, I mean, the party opposite tried an open borders experiment. We are now tackling illegal migration. They talked about flights, Mr. Speaker. We've already removed 24,000 people with no right to be here. Under their Rwanda scheme, which was only ever supposed to return, I think, 300 people a year, what we've achieved in 9 months would have taken them 80 years. We've replaced a gimmick with a real deterrent.
Tim Farrell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has spoken very movingly and with genuine sincerity and affection about his time as a young man in the Langdale Valley in the Lake District in my constituency and how that helped to shape him.
Tim Fallon.
So I wonder if he's aware that the hill farmers who maintain those stunning landscapes in the lakes and elsewhere will be earning on average significantly less or barely half the national minimum wage due to cuts in their income, despite the fact they provide the backdrop to the remarkably important tourism economy. So would he agree to meet with me and upland farmers in the lakes and the dales so that we can design a scheme together to end this poverty and equip our hill farmers to produce food and protect our epic landscapes for generations to come?
Yeah, Colin, I hate the
He and I share a love of the
Kiev
Lake District,
questions.
and we still go back there with our children now. This is a serious issue, obviously, and that's why we've put a record amount into farming at the budget, but also set out our roadmap. But I'll happily make sure that he gets a meeting with the relevant minister to go through that and to take on board any points he has to make in relation to it.
Any bills?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hundreds of residents in my constituency at Union Park are facing massive £1 million worth of charges to repair their heating system, to repair fire safety works that haven't been put right by the developer, who has now declared bankruptcy and walked away. Their new freeholder has washed their hands of responsibility and instead is leveraging huge ground rent bills and fines against those residents. Does the Prime Minister agree with me? This is exactly why we have to move forward with our plan, much delayed from the party opposite, to abolish the outdated leasehold system once and for all as part of our plan for change.
Prime Minister. Yeah, I'm up for that.
the Deputy Prime Minister is saying absolutely in my ear. Mr. Speaker, we will end the feudal leasehold system, which has left millions of homeowners subject to unfair costs and unreasonable practices. Our reforms include clear standards for repairs and maintenance, and this will give homeowners a greater say in how their homes are managed. And I know the Housing Minister will have heard what he said.
Mr. Speaker, this Labour government has failed the British public at every turn. They have abandoned the WASPy women, leaving them without compensation they deserve. They have turned their backs on pensioners by failing to support the winter fuel allowance. They have let down children by keeping a two-child benefit cap in place, and they will inflict further hardship on the most vulnerable by slashing $5 billion from benefits. But perhaps the most immediate and visible failure, one that poses an immediate and direct health risk to the people of Birmingham, is the appalling financial mismanagement of Labour-run Birmingham City Council. After more than a decade of Labour control, their incompetence has led to mountains of uncollected rubbish piling up on every street, so vast that it can be seen from satellites orbiting space. It is nothing short of a disgrace and a damning indictment of Labour's inability to govern. Will the Prime Minister take urgent action to protect the public health?
I can see my car from space.
Deploying the
order.
I can see it next to the
We're
house.
meant to ask a quick question, otherwise no one's going. Prime Minister.
Well, I've said the situation in Birmingham Council is completely unacceptable, but he might want to tell his constituents that we've delivered 2 million extra appointments for the NHS, so waiting lists are coming down for his constituents. We've delivered the national living wage, a £1,400 increase, including for his constituents. We've got record investment into this country, growing the economy, including for his constituents.
Doesn't answer the question. He was asking about the bins.
Blunder.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents in Harewood and Middleton North are grafters. They want to work and they want to see opportunities created and the skills and investment in infrastructure that we need in future. I welcome the Prime Minister's commitment to fix the transport system in the north of England that's been holding us back, and I would like to invite him to the Atom Valley Development Zone in my constituency to discuss how we can create skilled jobs in North Greater Manchester.
Prime Minister.
Is that even a question?
Well, I'm grateful for
a
question. We will unlock growth across the country in partnership with local leaders and giving powers to those with skin in the game.
I don't
and
think
we'll fix the North's broken transport system.
I don't think Labour should be allowed to ask questions of itself.
With nearly £1.7 billion for local buses, for roads and for trams, and an additional £415 million to upgrade the Trans-Pennine route and fixing millions of potholes. And obviously I'll consider her kind invitation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since the Prime Minister and I last spoke, more than 6,000 people have signed an open letter to the Health Secretary in support of North Devon District Hospital, which faces a 10-year wait for urgent repairs. Please can I ask the Prime Minister why the hospital is still being denied a ministerial visit, and will the government consider the Trust's emergency plans, meet with me and the Trust so we can discuss keeping the operating theatres open beyond 2027 to meet capacity?
Prime Minister.
Whose capacity?
As in our previous exchange, obviously the unfunded promises, fancy promises of the party opposite, meant his hospital would never have been delivered. They should apologise to his constituents. We had to take tough decisions to make the programme deliverable, which is what we've done. We will continue to support the Trust to maintain facilities in advance of the new hospital investment. And the Minister for Secondary Care will be visiting the hospital, and that will be an opportunity, I hope, for the necessary discussions.
Mr. Speaker, Stone Lodge Academy, a special school in Ipswich, will be one of the first schools in the country to benefit from a new breakfast club this month. It's an important step to tackling Suffolk's decade-long SEND crisis, as is the multi-million-pound funding settlement given to opening new specialist places across the county. Can the Prime Minister outline what steps he will be taking to further break down the opportunities for all children as part of our plan for change?
Well, I'm very pleased to say, Mr. Speaker, the first 750 breakfast clubs will open this month. And I'm pleased there's an early adopter in his constituency, as well as in the constituency of the Leader of the Opposition. I'm sure she will welcome that
MP?
one of these weeks.
He seems like a decent guy.
That will put £450 a year back in the pocket of working people.
Cheese Factor saying.
Mr. Speaker, today
I think
we've
of the movie.
awarded £37 million to 300 primary schools to
about
create up to 4,000 nursery places from September, making it easier for working families to access government-funded childcare.
Yeah, sure start, Billy. Bring it back.
Mr. Speaker, 2,700 workers at Scunthorpe Steelworks are facing redundancy, many more in the supply chain, and many of them are my Brigg & Gould constituents. It's welcome that negotiations are continuing, but whatever the outcome, significant support is going to be needed for to support the local economy. I know that all those affected would appreciate and be reassured that if the Prime Minister could give an indication that he was personally taking an interest in this, and that at some point in the not too distant future he would meet with me, neighbouring MPs and the council leader to discuss the way forward.
Prime Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to him for raising it. I do take a personal interest. I went to Scunthorpe to talk to management and the workers.
You went to Scunthorpe? I'm so sorry.
A while ago, and understand firsthand the challenges and how deeply worrying it will be for those working there and their families and the community as a whole. And that's why there are negotiations. I do call on the company to accept the offer of financial support that has been advanced so we can achieve a sustainable future for the workforce, for the industry and the local community, because I do believe there's a bright future for steel and needs to be a bright future for steel, but I do take a personal interest in it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Too many of my constituents are struggling to get access to a GP appointment when they need one. Our GPs are trying their best, but they're struggling with capacity, outdated buildings and outdated tech, all because the party opposite broke the front door to the National Health Service. Can the Prime Minister reassure my constituents that our plan for investment and reform will ensure they will be able to see a GP when they need one?
Mr. Speaker, we are focused on delivering real results for patients by scrapping unnecessary targets, bringing back the family doctor and requiring online bookings to help the 8 a.m. scramble. We're investing an additional £889 million to reinforce the front door of our NHS, and that's the biggest increase for over a decade, and will that mean hundreds more GPs since we came to power. And this week we've announced record investment for community pharmacies to deliver more services for patients and free up GP time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The recent NHS England report laid bare a catalogue of failures which left a patient with a history of violent aggression, unconfined, untreated and completely unmedicated for 9 months until he killed Ian Coates and young friends Grace O'Malley Kumar and Barnaby Webber from Taunton in my constituency. Will the Prime Minister join with me and the people of Taunton paying tribute to the families who have campaigned on this? Will he confirm that a public inquiry is to begin? And will he confirm that in the context of 50% cuts to integrated care boards, that mental health services, both in the community and secure, will not suffer from those cuts?
Prime Minister.
I agree with that.
Can I thank him for raising this
Please don't cut
tragic case? And I do pay tribute to the families, often in cases like this, including this case. I find it hard to think how I would actually respond if I was a family member in circumstances like that. I'm not sure I'd have the courage that they have to campaign in the way they campaign, and I pay tribute to it. We do need to get to the bottom of all of the issues here, wherever they may lie, and that's what we will do.
Imogen Walker.
Mr. Speaker, in Hamilton and Clyde Valley, my constituents are struggling to access the healthcare that they desperately need. 1 in 6 Scots are on a waiting list. Meanwhile, in England, the waiting lists have been coming down for the last 5 months, and more than 2 million appointments have been made available. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that the SNP-led government should stop blaming everybody else for their failures? When Scotland's broken public services are their responsibility.
Well, Mr. Speaker, she's right. Over 60,000 Scots have been stuck waiting for tests or treatment for over a year. That's a 46% rise in 1 year. I had to check that figure because it's so staggering. 46% rise in 1 year. And despite this backlog, almost 50,000 fewer operations are being carried out compared with before the pandemic. Mr. Speaker, compare that to England, where we've driven down waiting lists with over 2 million extra appointments and scrapped NHS England to cut bureaucracy. Scotland's NHS is in desperate need of reform, but the SNP have no strategy, no plans and no ideas.
Greg Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier, the Prime Minister seemed reticent to answer a direct question on his jobs tax. So, next time he comes to my constituency to enjoy the beautiful Buckinghamshire surroundings of Chequers, will he go 5 minutes up the road to Wendover, visit Rumsey's handmade chocolate, and explain to Kate Rumsey why his and his Chancellor's choices have led to a 15% increase in their costs, that they've already had to lay people off and reduce the hours of those that they still employ? Is that what he meant by growth?
Gosh! I'm happy to tell anyone why. £22 billion black hole left in last week. They've crashed the economy. They've ruined our public services. And as we mend that and rebuild the country, they carp from the sidelines. And even now, they can't bring themselves to say they don't want the investment. They can't bring them to say they'll reverse the decisions we've made. They actually agree with the decisions we've made because we're clearing up the mess that they left.
Mr. Speaker, 1 year ago yesterday, my constituent James Henderson was killed with other aid workers from World Central Kitchen, taking humanitarian aid into Gaza. Jim's family have told me Jim would want confirmation from our government that we're taking all conceivable steps to make sure that aid, power and supplies are safely returned to Gaza. Could the PM confirm he's doing all he can to ensure this? And could the Prime Minister also confirm he will continue to push for a full investigation to be completed into the deaths of Jim and the other British WCK workers, and for appropriate action to be taken?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank you for raising this appalling incident, and our thoughts remain with the families of Jim, of John Chapman and James Kirby. The attacks on aid workers, Mr. Speaker, are never justified. The families do deserve justice. We're pressing the Israeli government to accelerate their investigation, including whether criminal proceedings should be initiated. Can I also say Israel must stop blocking aid into Gaza? Hostages must be released. I'll be able to have an urgent resumption of the ceasefire.
Final question, Alberta Costa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Double child rapist and murderer Colin Pitchfork is up for parole for the 5th time. Now, I know the Prime Minister doesn't have any direct control, nor should he, over the parole board, but he does have a view. As I've asked all his predecessors, I now put the question to him. Does he agree with me that men who brutally rape and strangle to death young women should, as a matter of principle, spend most of their natural life in prison?
Prime Minister.
I'm grateful to him for raising this appalling case, and I absolutely agree with him that there must be maximum penalties for anyone falling into that category. I've seen many of these cases for myself firsthand when I was prosecutor for 5 years, working with the police on really terrible cases, and know the impact that it has on victims. I thank him for raising it.
That completes Prime Minister's questions. We'll let front benches change up. Right.
Okay, all rise, all rise. Okay, so they're switching over now. They've got an urgent question about the Chagos Islands coming up. I was a bit surprised that no one was asking about the Chagos Islands, but there is an urgent question. Now, it's up to you. We can stay with this if you like for the urgent question. Most of the people, as you can... Oh, sleazy quiz, what? 22 billion, what's going on? Most of the people are leaving, so I don't... It's not that urgent, is it? It's like getting off for lunch. Yeah, it's up to you. Let me know. Let me know if you want to listen to the statement on Chagos Islands. Where are we? Gina Lefty. I've got a 3-month wait. Oh, that's annoying. Oh, it's a question coming from
Speaker,
Priti
to ask the
Patel.
Secretary of State for Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Affairs if he'd make a statement on the status of the negotiations
still a
surrounding the
thing?
future sovereignty of the British Indian Ocean Territory.
Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the right honourable lady for her question. As we and Mauritius have repeatedly said, including in joint statements on the 20th of December and on the 13th of January, both sides remain committed to concluding a deal on the future of the Chagos Archipelago, which protects the long-term effective operation of the joint UK-US base on Diego Garcia. We are now working with Mauritius to finalise the agreement, and while it is in everybody's interest to progress the deal quickly, we have never put an exact date on it, and we do not intend to do so now. Following signature, Mr. Speaker, the Government will bring forward a bill to enable implementation of the treaty, and Parliament will of course also have the opportunity to scrutinise the treaty in the usual way before ratification. Can I repeat, Mr. Speaker? The Government inherited a situation where the long-term future of the military base was under threat. This deal is rooted in a rational and hard-headed determination to protect UK security and that of our allies. It will protect the base on Diego Garcia and cement UK and US presence in the Indo-Pacific for generations to come.
Shadow Foreign Secretary Dame Priti.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for granting this urgent question, because it is incredibly disappointing that only a day after oral questions yesterday, ministers have to be hauled back to the House to explain themselves as to what's going on. Because yesterday at lunchtime, Downing Street briefed out the agreement to give away the Chagos Islands and pay for the privilege is now being finalised between the UK and Mauritius, which was not said in this House yesterday. The Prime Minister of Mauritius has also issued a public statement confirming this. Despite being interrogated on this botched deal yesterday in this chambers, ministers gave no indication of this very significant and material development. And we are still completely in the dark about the fundamental questions of this enormous importance. How many billions of hard-pressed taxpayers' British money will be expected to fork out to lease back the territory we already own? Just as vulnerable pensioners are having their winter payments ripped away and family farms and businesses are being punished with new taxes because of this Labour government, what safeguards will be in place to protect the military base on Diego Garcia from other states, Mr. Speaker, who may try and establish a foothold on the archipelago? Ministers have so far refused to even publish a map of the buffer zone. What happens to the vitally important military base on Diego Garcia at the end of the treaty? What kind of sovereign rights, if any, will we be able to exercise over Diego Garcia in the meantime? The Prime Minister of Mauritius says he forced changes to exercise sovereign rights and get the lease extension arrangements changed. So will the Minister finally confirm that his account is correct? He cannot simply stand here and avoid these questions. The House does deserve answers. The British public, taxpayers, deserve answers. Put simply, Mr. Speaker, the British Indian Ocean Territory should remain British, but Labour have prioritised appeasing the whims of left-wing lawyers and activists rather than standing up for our national interests.
Really? She's going for the lefty lawyers line.
Deal was ditched.
I'll have to use that one for a
finally,
while.
Mr. Speaker, there have been reports of implied military threats to the Chagos Islands. They may laugh over this issue, but it's fundamental to the security of our country. A British sovereign territory from the regime in Tehran. Tehran, the Iranian regime, has threatened this base and the important military threats that they are now purporting. We understand in response to reports of an unusual build-up of American bomber aircraft and equipment, Mr. Speaker, carrying aircraft at the joint UK military base on Diego Garcia. This is very serious. Clearly, we need to take these threats seriously, and we welcome clarity on what the Foreign Office is doing on the diplomatic response on this issue.
Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I do have to say to the right honourable lady that in terms of parliamentary accountability, I think I've answered no less than 5 urgent questions in the last 6 months. I have answered, I think, 130 written questions to the honourable lady and her colleagues. We discussed it twice at Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Questions yesterday, and as I've repeatedly said, when the details of the treaty are finalised, they will be presented to this House there will be full scrutiny in the usual way, and I've explained today that a bill will be put forward to put into practice the important aspects that require legislative change. There will, of course, be full debate, and as it should in this House, Mr. Speaker. I simply reject the premise of much of what her question was based on. As I've said repeatedly, if there was not a problem here, why did her government, which she was part of, start negotiations and go through 11 rounds, Mr. Speaker? There is a significant challenge here. This deal is paramount for our national security. We won't scrimp on our security, and it is important that it is put into place, and that has been recognised by all the parties. Now, Mr. Speaker, we will only agree a deal that's in the UK's best interests and protect our national security. And she asked importantly about the security provisions to protect the base. And these will include full UK control over Diego Garcia, including control over the electromagnetic spectrum and unrestricted access to and the use of the base. It will include a buffer zone around Diego Garcia in which nothing can be built or put in place without our consent. There will be a robust mechanism and review process to ensure no activity in the Outer Islands, Mr. Speaker, can impinge upon base operations. And indeed, Mr. Speaker, there will be a prohibition on the presence of foreign security forces on the Outer Islands, either civilian or military. And of course, the full details, as the Prime Minister has said, will be set out when the treaty is laid before Parliament, and that will include costs. Now, we will not scrimp on security, Mr. Speaker. She asked an important question in relation to Iran, and she will understand that for operational reasons and as a matter of policy, we do not offer comment or information relating to foreign nations' military aircraft movements or operations. And the UK, in close cooperation with our allies in the United States, closely monitor the security environment in the Indian Ocean region in order to identify and mitigate any potential threats to the base on Diego Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I share
I'm going to leave
the
it at
Minister's
that
bafflement.
because that was a nothing burger, wasn't it? And it was a really good question. Like, why does she suddenly care about this? This is something that the Tories put together. You know, they started these talks about the Chagos Islands with the government of Mauritius, which is a member of the Commonwealth, by the way. There were some things said about the government of Mauritius by the Tories, and I was about Mauritius, and I'm like, it's a Commonwealth member. It's it's a trusted trading partner, which is a lot more than America is at the moment. America's not part of the Commonwealth, despite Trump not really understanding what the Commonwealth is, and it's not it's not a trusted trading partner anymore. It's doing stupid things like starting a trade war at 9 o'clock tonight, our time. Benjamin, Iran threatened the US's base on the Chagos Islands. They didn't threaten the UK's base. Colin, it isn't, but that voice and the rubbish it spews should dampen lustful thoughts. Don't objectify our Tory politicians. Shut up, Patel, says Ivan. Shut up, Wesley. Shut up, Wesley. Why is this island important? So the British Indian Ocean territories are a bunch of islands, and they are to the east of Mauritius, Reunion, and Madagascar, and they are to the south of Sri Lanka and India. In fact, I think you can't see it, just like a blank piece of paper here, but this, move my finger so you can see, this chart here, this is a shipping chart of the Indian Ocean. If I got it down off the wall, I could show you, because it shows where the shallow water is, and it's in blue, so it's really obvious on there. It's not just like a little tiny speck, like most islands are on maps. The thing is, in the 1960s, when Mauritius and there's another island called Rodriguez, I think, which is nearby, they got incorporated into the independent country of Mauritius, and they thought they were also going to get the Chagos Islands. But they didn't. Britain kept hold of that and said, no, we're keeping that. And they leased for like $1 or something. It was like very cheap lease for the Americans to put a base on the island of Diego Garcia. And most importantly, all the people who lived there, the Chagos Islanders, were all forcibly moved off their islands, where they, had lived, families had lived for hundreds of years. And they were forcibly moved to Mauritius and other places. And why this sort of came to the fore a few years ago was actually because of some refugees from Sri Lanka who sailed south and then claimed asylum from Britain. Because if it's a British territory, it's part of Britain. And the rule is you have to step foot on dry land in a country in order to claim asylum. So that went through the courts of like, are these genuine, they were genuine refugees, but can they claim migration? What's it called? Can they claim asylum? Because technically they've set foot on British sovereign soil. Yeah. And so that's why it all started kicking off in the first place under the Tories. And they started these talks. They had like 10 rounds of talks or something with the Mauritian government and the American government about what we're going to do next with the Chagos Islands. And it was agreed that the other islands were going to be given back to Mauritius to administer, but except for Diego Garcia, which was going to remain as, I think in law it would be Mauritian, but the lease on the bases there will be forever, and there'll be an exclusion zone. So think about like Guantanamo Bay in Cuba, which exists because of the consequences of the fucking US-Spanish War of like the 1890s or something. It's in perpetuity, so that the US own a chunk of Cuba, and there's nothing the Cubans can do about it. I think the same thing. That's the plan with the Chagos Islands. But the Tories trying to turn it into something is very much like they want people to be thinking that we still have our empire. I think someone was shouting like, oh yeah, one angry pagan. Of all people, who would be shouting in the chat? It was one angry pagan a little bit earlier said, we aren't an empire anymore, pretty, for fuck's sake. Yeah, we're not. But the people who like to think that we are or lament the loss of our empire are the type of people who vote for Conservatives. And so they're making this into a bigger issue than it is. And they're talking about, we're giving up sovereignty. We're giving up the sovereignty of these islands that nobody went to and no one visited. And you can't even get close to them because the American military will scare you off. Ivan, thank you very much for the £5 super chat, my friend. That's very kind of you. Disappointed nothing was said in PMQs about the dangerous cuts to disability benefits since the spring statement last week. We are not going away. Yeah, there's probably two reasons for that. One is that Labour MPs aren't likely to stand up and say, we think this is shit. Although, I did see Debbie Abrams, who she's the MP for Oldham East, I think. And she's very much against these cuts, and she spoke in Parliament last week. Maybe she wasn't given a question. But then when it went to the other side, obviously the Tories, they don't care. They don't care about disabled people. They don't care about people struggling with mental health. They don't care about people struggling in life. They're not. They're all right. That Tory who stood up, Greg Twatface, what was his name? He's privately educated, of course. He's like, oh no, in mid Bedfordshire. But the Lib Dems SNP could have stood up and made a point about it. But yeah, they chose not to. I don't know why. Well, maybe they tried. But yeah, it was disappointing that no one called them out on that, because it's not like the way that Labour are behaving at the moment. It's not like this is what anyone wanted. Who voted for Labour. We weren't voting for cuts for disabled people. But it's not just the cuts and how hard they are, and who gets affected. And they're trying to balance it with, well, the pension's going up, this is going up, that's going up, and the cost of this will go down, and it will all balance itself out. All work itself out in the wash. But it's the stress it's causing on top of everything else. The stress, I think it's just really cruel. I think it's cruel. I think it's absolute cruelty. Oliver says, "Do we keep nuclear weapons there, Graham?" I don't think we keep nuclear weapons as in, I don't think there's any silos there, but I think that they have the facilities, and someone correct me who knows more about the military than I do. I think they have the facilities there to refuel our submarines in the Trident program, one of which is always at sea. It's always at sea somewhere in the world. And I think Diego Garcia is one of the few places in the world where it can be refueled kind of secretly away from everyone. I know that there's a lot of like American military tech that will be able to stop these battleships that the Americans have got, the aircraft carriers and stuff. Holy fuck, they're huge, like floating cities. You know, they have their own McDonald's and stuff on board. They've got their own like shopping malls. I'm not kidding. Like they have a shopping mall on board the ship that all the sailors are sailing, and they can choose to spend their money. They go to the cinema. Like it's mind blowing. It is like a floating city, only with more weapons. These massive, massive aircraft carriers that the Americans have got, and I'm pretty sure one of them could come alongside, and they're nuclear armed as well. Some of their ships are nuclear armed. So I'm not saying that there's nuclear weapons there, as in silos that can blast nuclear weapons, but the ships and submarines that have nuclear weapons on board can be serviced and can be, whatever needs to be done, refueled at that base, I believe. But like I say, I'm not an expert on it. I just know that it should have been part of Mauritius a long time ago in the 1960s, but we decided no, that strategically that made sense for us to keep it back then, because we were fighting this war against the people in Moscow who just wanted to fuck with us and wanted to destroy our way of being, our way of life. And thank God those days are over, Considering the British Empire stopped being a thing in 1999-ish, she is old enough to remember that we're not an empire anymore. And he says, to be fair, we voted to mitigate Tory damage more than any vision on Labour's part. That's very true. That's very true. US aircraft carriers are nuclear powered. They are indeed. Enough nuclear power to run a small city. Seriously, they could plug in an emergency situation. A US aircraft carrier could plug in to a city grid and power the city. It really could. It's quite insane. Whereas Americans don't like nuclear power on their land. They don't want it in America. They're quite happy for their ships to go around being nuclear powered. And honestly, they go like shit off a shovel. I make jokes a lot about how slow ships are, because like you go sailing, the captain's dead excited, the skipper's dead excited because you're doing 7 knots. And it's like, how fast is that in miles an hour? And they're like, about 8. It's like not very fast at all. 7 knots is literally 7 nautical miles an hour. Nautical miles slightly longer than a land mile. But yeah, these ships, the actual speed they can go is a state secret, apparently. But yeah, they can reach speeds of like 40 miles an hour, which doesn't sound like that fast when you think of like a fucking, when you think of a speedboat or going out on driving a car. It's not very fast in a car. But you got to remember that like most of the cargo ships that buzz around the sea, they go at like 20 knots, like maximum. Most of them go slower than that these days. And yeah, so like being able to go that fast with a craft that is that big is just, it's mind blowing. It's absolutely mind blowing. All this money being spent on this shit when, we could be diving for pearls, as Elvis Costello once sang. It's very depressing. We're having to take money away from US aid, and British overseas foreign money is being taken away. British aid money to other countries is being reduced so we can pay for weapons. We can pay for more ships and bombs and tanks. Engines of death and destruction. Because of the egos of like 3 gobshites. 3 of them. There's 3 gobshites. The 3 gobshites, like the three amigos, but they're all gobshites. Trump, Putin, and I guess arguably Xi Jinping in China. Gobshites. And because of those 3 men, we are all living in a, in a state of constant fucking panic. We lurch from crisis to crisis, and we have done since September the 11th, 2001. We had, September the 11th. We had the invasion of Afghanistan and the invasion of Iraq. Then we had the credit crunch. Then we had austerity. Then we had Brexit. Then we had COVID. We had Trump. We had Truss. We had Trump again. It's just the invasion of Ukraine, the invasion of Georgia, the annexation of the Crimean Peninsula. It's too much. Too much. But, remove the man, remove the problem. Ivan says, Graham, what were you drinking last night? Did you have all types of alcoholic drink under the sun? No, I was just on beer. Boring lager. That's all I drink when I go out. I don't really do cocktails and chasers and all the cool stuff. Because I've got to kind of keep it together. I don't want to lose my hat. But no, it was really good. It was really good. It was a really good gig last night. So I went to see, for those who went with us this morning, I went to see The Darkness, and they were supported by Ash, who were mates of ours. So they got us in. I just love live music. I just love being at gigs, and it's so sad now that they're so expensive, and it's the only way that a lot of artists can make their money now, because you used to gig like almost like a loss or something, unless you were playing stadiums or something. But you play these little gigs where you charge £5 a ticket, and you probably get a couple hundred people turn up. So no one made loads of money out of them. But they were set up so you could promote your next album. You could try new songs on the audience. You could, it was more marketing. It was like doing a music video or something. Now it's the only way they can make money. So these bands are just constantly touring because they have to. They've got no choice in the matter. Radiohead are touring again this year, apparently. Oasis are back. I could see R.E.M. coming back. I know they disbanded a few years ago, but they're going to need the money because no one's making... In days gone by, you made one cracking album, even one cracking song if you're very lucky, and you could live off the royalties for the rest of your life. Live a very, very nice life off the royalties. That world does not exist anymore. But instead of promoting and pushing for more live music and supporting artists and supporting venues, we're seeing very little support by way of the government. I mean, under the Tories, we won't get anything at all, but I don't even think this is on Labour's radar at the moment, and it really, really should be. Because if you try and think of certain things that the UK excels in the world, music is one of them. Like our music scene, oh my God, we punch well above our weight when it comes to music. I mean, I would argue that the three countries with the most impact on music in the 20th century were Britain, the US, and Jamaica. And I know there's a lot of cultural heritage that's come into that, and the fact that Britain was going around the world stealing everything, languages, music, chord progressions. And the US, it's just huge a population, isn't it? But even so, music is something that is a true connection between humans that you can't fake it. I mean, I'm sure they can use AI to make some EDM shit, but I don't really. I'm gonna probably upset a few people watching this, but I don't really regard that as music. I know, but it seems to me that when you go to you go to an art gallery, right? And people go, "Is this art?" Well, of course it is. Of course, EDM is music, right? It's got music in the name. However, I could do that. I'm not particularly musical, but I could do that. I could spend a fucking afternoon on Cakewalk and put some beats together and get it rising up to a big beat, big drop, I could put all that in, I could spend the day looking for samples from all the little crazy songs from the 1960s and 70s that I love, and just getting a little bit, sticking it all together, editing it. It's like editing a video or something. And I don't think that I'm a musician, so I don't think I should be able to do that. In the same way, if I go to an art gallery and I see stuff that I could do, I don't really regard it as art. I know I should say like all art is art, but if it's just an idea, if it's just a brick in the room or a light that turns on and off, I'm just looking at it going, because I could do it. and I'm not an artist. So the AI might replace a lot of incidental music, classical music. I think it's going to be really in a bad place as a result of this AI tsunami that's washing over us. But I can't see like rock music and real singers. I know we've done a few gigs. I haven't, but people have done a few gigs where they've got like a hologram 2-pack or something, or hologram Elvis to come and sing a song. But that's for someone, or what was it? Journey, the Voyage, sorry, with ABBA. Yeah, that's for famous artists. That's for famous bands that have existed, and they're sort of trying to recreate them in a way. But it's never going to be the same as seeing the actual band live, interacting with them, cheering, and although I do want us to bring back mosh pits. I tried to do a one-man mosh pit last night at the gig. Didn't get very far. Ernie says, I signed a music deal recently. 150,000 streams will give me 30p that I have to split with someone. Fucking hell. Exactly, mate. So yeah, I'd like to see more support for live music. Don't know what that's got to do with PMQs, but there you go. Right, I'm going to get off. I'll be back at... when am I going to be back? No, at 6 o'clock. 6 o'clock. Maybe I'll have a clip before then. Still a bit discombobulated. I'll see you at 6 o'clock for the rabbit hole. And then at 9 o'clock, I'll be doing a show. I don't think Ollie can join me. I think Ollie's doing his own thing, actually, at 9. So you can watch Ollie if you want. But I'll be doing a show as the tariffs come in, talking about how shit they are for everybody. Maybe I could talk to Mikey Famine, see if he wants to come and have a natter about it. So there you go. I went to some sick mosh pits as a team. What? Mosh pits with sick in them? Ugh! They don't want to fall over in that. Mosh pits were fun. Respectfully nodding to artists keeps the law alive. Most of what's in the Tate's modern isn't art. It's just scammers who come up with an idea which appeal to rich morons. Vendetta. I didn't want to say it out loud, but I suppose I read out your message loud, but yeah. I'm sorry, but I don't want to come all over the Daily Mail. That's a turn of phrase, isn't it? But I do like the Turner Prize, though. And before I go, I do like the Turner Prize just because it enrages the gammon. That's the only reason. I'm like, yeah, do some crazy shit. There's like someone furiously reading the Daily Mail, going, I'm so angry, Someone's just got like a tape measure and stuck it to the wall. They go, that's art. They go, oh my God, give it an award. Give it the Turner Prize. I'm sure Turner will be Turnering in his grave. And Billy Kershaw says, your dad's balls? Oh, thanks. And a little scribble. Burying his nuts. Anyway, moving on. Okay, so I'll see you at 6, hopefully later today. And if not, I'll see you tomorrow morning at 9 for next morning brew. But until then, I'll say thanks for watching. Thanks for the chat. Thanks for the super chat. And until next time, hello, good evening, welcome, and goodbye.